It's been 94 minutes since Chris and Jessica dropped off the radar.
But the interpolation from their last known coordinates puts them...
right here on this ship.
So, Resident Evil Revelations. I was really curious about this game because it's not part of the main series, and yet it does prominently feature both Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield, which are the two lead characters from the original game. So, I was incredibly interested about what this one had to offer, what it was all about, and what it could give me in the context of a side story with the duo that started it all. As well, any chance I get to see Jill again, and this time wetsuit Jill, I mean, that's an immediate bonus. But I'd also heard a lot of mixed things on this one, and after a playthrough of it, I can understand why. Apparently, this was originally made for the DS back in 2012, but I did play the PC version, and I did notice some strange yet interesting differences in the mechanics. But overall, I'm just trying to experience as much of the complete Resident Evil story as I can, and also play in chronological order from this point forward. I asked around, and a lot of people said it didn't really matter if I played this game before or after Resident Evil 5, but I do think, considering the upcoming events of 5, having another life or death mission with Jill and Chris together before that happens will add to the emotional stakes. Pretty much this entire game takes place on a massive ship out in the middle of the ocean. We have Jill teamed up with a guy named Parker, now working as part of a new organization called the BSSA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, basically taking down terrorist groups that use bioweapons and viral infections. Which I like, considering Jill's affirmation at the end of Resident Evil 3 that her motivation was clear. She was going to try to stop as much of this as possible. And that aspect of her character works very well here, and is perfectly valid after her previous experiences. With Umbrella going under, several other groups and organizations have gotten their hands on various strains of the virus, doing their own experiments, but what I thought was the most interesting is the backstory setup of this game, and how another city, Terra Grigia, had a BOW outbreak, mostly made up of hunters, and was also destroyed, but in a very different way using a satellite with powerful energy rays. But similar to Raccoon City, it was another outbreak, and here it was stated that the general public is now aware of these potential threats because a lot of it was broadcast to the world. So that expands and changes the world building a little bit and creates this idea that bioweapons might potentially show up anywhere now. The attack was blamed on a terrorist group called Veltro, which I kept thinking Velcro in my mind for some reason, I don't know why. But Jill and Parker have to investigate this giant ship that belonged to them, specifically also looking for a missing Chris Redfield and his partner Jessica. The ship is mostly abandoned, but filled with bioweapons that look kind of similar to the regenerators in RE4, but I think they're supposed to be waterlogged and bloated from the moisture. These pale, monstrous mutations have a variety of different attacks they can use, and they really just want to kill you. The idea of a giant ship is a great location for this franchise, and there's a lot of different elements of it you can explore. You have the lower decks that are a bit more haunting, the huge central area. There's a casino on board, lots of places to get turned around. There's even areas with fancy dining halls and huge chandeliers that at any moment feel like Leonardo DiCaprio might show up. But probably because this was made for the DS, there are some significant differences in the controls. You don't really have item slots or boxes at all. You just grab items until you hit your limit, and then you find supplies that you can upgrade those weapons, but only at specific locations that look like a traditional item box. There's no mixing of herbs here, which really threw me off, and all you have for health are the green herbs, and instead of going into your items to pick it or combine it with other things, you just hit one button on the controller and you're automatically healed. I'm not gonna lie, it was actually extremely helpful just to be able to flick a button in the middle of a fight and be healed, but it did feel like one of the biggest differences of the entire game. I guess it boiled it down to the most simplistic elements, but in a way that does kind of take away the customizable experience of being able to mix things the way that you want. I mean, I guess the weapons upgrade is the most customizable aspect of the game, but it still did feel a little off. Most of how you play the game is traditional Resident Evil flair. There's some doors that are locked on the ship. You navigate your way around. You find some keys to open doors that you couldn't get in before. Things are connected in various ways, and you get familiarized with the ship as you go about it. In addition, there's also a piece of the map in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, which felt incredibly helpful and something that I kind of wish more of the games had. But the 3D map was kind of confusing and didn't really show you how things were connected as well as I wish it would have. Also, a huge shift is the way that the story is presented. Resident Evil 4 had chapters to its story, and this one does too, but Revelations feels a little bit more like you're watching a TV series. Every chapter has a recap, like previously on Resident Evil, and it's kind of weird. It's an interesting vibe, but the story unfolds almost like a political thriller, leading up to a big cliffhanger and a big revelation in the next chapter. But that kind of took away from it feeling like a horror game, and I guess if I had any real gripes, it would be that. Though some of the enemies are creepy and the designs are certainly monstrous, probably the freakiest to me was towards the end of the game where you're swimming around and these giant flat gray blob creatures just swallow you whole if you're not careful. But the overall tone and atmosphere of the game is very action and mystery solving heavy. You have a lot of combat here, and there's never really a moment where you want to run away from an enemy. In fact, there's segments where you're literally hunting them down. There's a woman that gets infected, and she does some really creepy whispering when you're trying to find her, but when you do start fighting her, mostly you're the one chasing after her, and she's sneaking away in the vents to try to get you in a different room. I mean, to be fair, you are playing as Jill, and at this point, she's survived the mansion, Lisa Trevor, Raccoon City, Nemesis, and all of that stuff, so she really doesn't give a shit about the monsters at this point, I would imagine, and is more confident in taking them down, and also the added determination to end bioterrorism as a whole, but there wasn't really any scene or moment where I felt scared or intimidated by any of the enemies. Honestly, it was the fucking red laser sequence that scared me more than anything else. The story is also told a bit out of order, with various flashbacks to Terra Grigia and the Outbreak, and you play as multiple characters throughout the course of the game to see different perspectives of these events. Mostly, you do play as Jill, exploring the ship, and I would say probably about 80% of the game, you are Jill. But there's also moments where you do get to play as Chris and see what he was up to with his side of the investigation, and also this really big heart-pounding moment where you make it to the ship, fighting your way through a horde of monsters, heading to rescue Jill, only to discover she's on an entirely different ship, and this one was built identical to the other one. I gotta say, they got me with this one. You also play as Parker, Jill's partner in the beginning of this game, and you get to see what happened to him during the Terra Grigia outbreak scenes. I thought he was a pretty fun character. He's good-natured and just wanting to help out. Not as experienced as some of the others, but no slouch either. He's a good dude, and I did like to play these little outbreak segments. But then you also briefly play as one of these two characters, Quint and Grinder, who are gathering intel separate from the others, facing off against hunters that can camouflage themselves. And I guess they're here to provide a comic relief, but man, did these characters feel like they were way out of left field.
Wow, that sounds like a job for us, don't it, Grinder?
The sequences you play as them are fun enough, but I really didn't care for them at all. I guess it's fine as far as a world-building perspective goes. And yeah, an organization like this would definitely have different kinds of people in different areas with multiple tasks that they're doing, but these guys still didn't do it for me. There's a lot of the game where you traverse the location with your partner, but they're pretty useless when it comes to helping you fight enemies. They do shoot, but I tested it a few times standing back just to see if they could actually kill an enemy by themselves, and it almost never happened. You always have to deliver the finishing blow yourself. But on the plus side, they also don't seem to ever die as much as they get hit, so it's not like an Ashley situation where you constantly have to worry about them. There's a scanning device that seems like it's going to be important, introduced early on in the game, but it really doesn't benefit you that much further in the game, with the exception of when you're fighting the hunters that can camouflage themselves. It lets you see them a little bit better, as well as when you're navigating the red laser segment. So it's there, but it's introduced as something that's going to be so important to have, and I guess if you scan enough enemies, you get an extra green herb, but I don't know, seemed like an element that just didn't really need to be there. There's also moments of the game where it kind of shifts into a first-person shooter, not entirely except for a few parts, but these moments felt like I was playing a shooting arcade game or something. It's a cool little change of pace, but a little jarring for Resident Evil. I do like the setting of the ship, and navigating it wasn't too bad, although I did get backtracked a few times. The most annoying part to me was when the ship starts flooding and there's several underwater sequences where you have to swim, and for whatever reason, these were the easiest portions for me to get lost. The first time I died in the whole game was because I drowned not knowing where to go or what to do. And even though Jill is my favorite Resident Evil protagonist, I was hoping to play as Chris a little bit more often than you get to, and really in terms of the two originals of the franchise both being back, they really only meet up and team up back in the final third of the game. It's alright because it helps you build the suspense and anticipation to see them together again, and you do get several hilarious moments of Chris's new partner Jessica trying to flirt with him, and Chris just not giving a single shit.
We've already searched the Queen Semiramis, so I think I know where this ship's lab is.
On a side note, I don't personally ship Jill and Chris as a couple. I see them literally as teammates that are more of a sibling dynamic than anything else. But if I had to ship Jill with anyone, it would be with me. The overall storyline and why this game is called Revelations is because, well, you get a lot of revelations. Nobody is who they say they are, everybody has a hidden agenda, and there's some really unnecessary plot twists that, like I said, make this feel like I'm watching a political thriller TV series than anything horror related. The leader of the FBC, Morgan Lansdale, was working with Veltro and used them as scapegoats for the BOW attack on Terra Grigia. Meanwhile, Jessica was acting as a spy for a pharmaceutical company that wanted the virus. So, their boss wasn't able to tell them what their real objective was, which was to get enough evidence to bring Morgan down. So, if I understand it right, and I might not, Chris and Jill's team were sent out with different objectives than what their boss actually wanted them to do, which was to get the evidence to link Morgan to Veltro and take him down. I think. I may have gotten distracted a few times during the storyline for reasons. What I do know is that when you escape the ship, you have to fight this giant sea creature mutated by the virus, and it's the first time from these games that I've played that you really battle a kaiju-sized enemy. This thing is basically swallowing up half the ship, and you have to fight him both on the ship itself, and then it switches to a first-person shooter style where you're on a helicopter just blasting his wormy appendages as much as possible. It's super simplistic, but it was a lot of fun. And as far as variety of monsters go in the series, it's very different than the usual fare, and I like seeing a giant kaiju monster in the middle of the ocean. The final portion of the game is at a third ship. Really? But this one has long sunk to the bottom of the ocean, and Chris and Jill enter to find the evidence that they need, stumbling upon the final surviving member of Veltro, its leader, who injects himself with the virus, becoming a final boss tyrant character that you fight together, but really, Chris is no help here whatsoever, and basically you just fight him alone. It's definitely one of those fights where it seems incredibly difficult at first, but as soon as you realize how to fight him, it's pretty easy. When he attacks, there's this blur effect that distorts you and you see double, but the real version of him has an exposed heart, so if you attack the heart quickly before he hits you, you can deal a lot of damage, and just repeating that process will get the job done. But I'm also shocked that you don't have the option to play as Chris during the final portions. I mean, I would have picked Jill anyway, but considering that this is the first time that we see them both working together since the original, it still really is mostly a Jill game with some occasional deviations. On the one hand, I like the conspiracy theory angle with a section of the government being in cahoots with the terrorists, and now that some of these virus strains are just out and about in the world, they can be used for a variety of purposes and agendas. As far as the world building goes, I like that idea. Also that there's been a second major outbreak and destruction of a city after Raccoon City, and the Parker portions of the game help you live out that experience. The ship was a great location idea, and there's plenty of fun mystery and intrigue as the game starts. I like catching up with the past characters and seeing the new missions that they're on, but I'm also a bit disappointed by the lack of horror and suspense and scares here. I think that this was a turning point of the franchise where, after the original Resident Evil 4, it really started to stray heavy into the action until Resident Evil 7. But this one feels more like what I would imagine the Metal Gear Solid games feel like. Action, mystery, conspiracies, political corruption, and in an episodic format. But considering this is a side story and not part of the main titles, I guess that's the best place for an opportunity to try a format like this. And I still had a lot of enjoyment with it. I was also kind of hoping for a few more references or mentions of the Spencer Mansion or Raccoon City, but it really doesn't come up. Reason being is getting to see Jill and Chris together again and interacting. Maybe it's just me wanting much more of a connection to the storyline, not realizing that this is a video game that focuses more on its own thing, and it's not meant to be an overall arcing narrative of some sort. But as somebody who's drawn to characters and storylines, I just wanted them to interact a little bit more. The worst thing I can say about this game really is that it's okay. It's just okay. There's nothing that wowed me about it, and the only particular boss battle that stood out to me was the giant slug monster. I like its implications of the world building and the viruses ending up in other people's hands, and it's great to catch up with the classic characters. It's just nothing too impactful, and it feels like standard Resident Evil setups instead of something more memorable. It didn't frustrate me in any kind of way like Zero did, so my negatives aren't really harsh. My negative is really just that I don't have more positives. I think it's a fun game, just nothing special. So let me know what you guys think of Revelations down below. I know there's a Revelations 2, but I'm going to try to go in chronological order. So next up for me will be Resident Evil 5, and I am so excited to finally get to this one. I have been eagerly awaiting a jacked, boulder-punching Chris Redfield and the true return of Wesker. But until then, let me know your thoughts on Revelation down in the comments. Thanks as always for watching. Thanks for watching this series, guys. If you want to, I have reviews of Resident Evil 1 through 4. I'll link the playlist down below, as well as I went and reviewed every single live-action Resident Evil. I don't know why. My sanity is in question, but that's a video for you to check out too. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you next time.